It has been a couple weeks since we last talked about the situation in the Israeli-Palestine war and the utter destruction that is happening in Gaza. Since we last spoke, the situation has changed dramatically with IDF troops encircling a number of pockets of Hamas fighters in the area of Gaza City itself. An invasion of the southern Gaza Strip into the city of Khan Yunis has begun with rapid IDF gains. The humanitarian situation is on the verge of collapse. Hamas authorities are claiming 20,000 civilians have been killed so far, while international organizations are claiming Gaza City has no longer a functional hospital, and 500,000 civilians are now on the verge of starvation. While the threat of a wider conflict appears to be cooling down, a new international threat is rising, which could force governments around the world to push Israel to peace. Let's dive into the details of this dire geopolitical event. Please consider hitting both the like and subscribe buttons. Check out our links for sponsors and other ways to support the channel, and consider following New World Geopolitics on Telegram and Twitter. First, to cover the humanitarian situation, this is one of the most important aspects of the event. International organizations now claiming that 570,000 people are on the verge of starvation in the Gaza Strip due to the Israeli blockade. Few aid resources are coming into the city, and those that are being hoarded are being hoarded by Hamas or other parties. Not to mention, sieges in general result in the hoarding of resources even when there is proper time to prepare for a siege.
Did you know there has been a marked drop in thievery?
I did not know. And how did you accomplish this marked drop in thievery?
Me and the lads rounded up all the known thieves.
For questioning?
No. It's just the unknown thieves we need to worry about now.
We talked about this.
Aye, we talked about it. Have you ever been in a city under siege? Maybe this part's not in your books. See, it's not the fighting that kills most people, it's the starving. Food's worth more than gold. Noble ladies sell their diamonds for a sack of potatoes. Things get bad enough. The poor start eating each other. The thieves, they love a siege. Soon as the gates are sealed, they steal all the food. By the time it's all over, they're the richest men in town.
This has placed immense pressure on the U.S. President Joe Biden, who is at odds with his voter base in support for Israel. Now 51% of young Americans, which typically is the most important Democratic voter base of the last decade, not only says they do not support U.S. actions on behalf of Israel, but they believe that the state of Israel should be dissolved and Hamas should be granted control of all of the Israeli and Palestinian territory. Obviously, this is a very extreme opinion from what the baseline would be, which is somewhere closer to just wanting the bombing to stop. That's basically my position, and I think most people agree with that at a bare minimum. The people of Gaza are suffering greatly, and based on the video that is coming out, it appears like the IDF is acting rather callously and clumsily with their bombing campaigns. I am looking at this story about the starvation in Gaza on Ground News, an app and website that shows data that mainstream media often tries to hide and makes it easier for me to get all the sides of the story in the same place. Like I've said before, I am proud to be sponsored by Ground News because it is a product that I have been using before I even started a YouTube channel. I actually had the free version of the app on my phone since I was in college. Looking at this story, you can see that there are 111 total sources, with 86% being from the left and center. So we see a clear conservative bias in the reporting on this story, with 63% of those sources actually being from the center. This is likely because conservatives support Israel, and information about the suffering harms their current position. This, I believe, is a big reason why so many in the US are oblivious to the horrors that are happening. Taking a closer look at the bias insights, which are generated by the Ground News AI observations, you can see the distinct narratives that are forming based on the political bias of the publisher. With the Vantage subscription, you also have access to data for a factuality matrix and an ownership matrix, which tells you who owns the various news outlets reporting on the story, which is personally my favorite feature. You also have access to blind spots, which gives you insight into which stories are underreported by the left and the right, a feature where a great number of Israel-Palestine stories end up, and based on media bias, you might miss them altogether. To gain access to these features, go to ground.news/NWG and subscribe through my link for 40% off unlimited access with the Vantage subscription, or for just $1 a month. That's ground.news/NWG for a better way to read the news. Thank you once again to Ground News for sponsoring this channel and helping us conduct reliable open source reporting. Since there's a lot of updates, we will quickly go through the various parts of the city before we move on to the most important topic of global impact. The current stated goals of the IDF and Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu are to get the Israeli hostages released and to remove Hamas from power and destroy them. There are other goals that don't seem to be as clear, or at least not publicly stated, but at least for PR purposes, these are somewhat good goals. Unfortunately, they contradict one another, as Hamas is probably counting on trading the hostages in order to keep control and gain peace. The actions of the Israeli military have also led to the death of several hostages. With that being said, we will start with the Gaza area itself. In the far north, Beit Hanun has been completely captured, and a pincer into the Jabalia refugee camp has completely isolated a pocket around Beit Lahia. This refugee camp is one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the Gaza area, and is probably one of the most dangerous places to be at the moment. Further to the south, Israeli movements have reached the city center, and in doing so, 3 separate pincer movements have created 2 separate pockets in the southern neighborhoods of Gaza proper. At this point, well over half of the city has fallen to the IDF, including most of the hospitals. The ones that remain have no power, no supplies, basically nothing. So civilians that need medical care must get to the Israeli side, and for that to happen, we need a ceasefire, which is rumored that there could be another temporary halt in the attack in the near future to allow this to happen and to allow for the negotiations over the hostages. Quickly going to the southern part of the strip, the IDF has pushed into the territory at 4 different access points. On the approach to Rafah in the far south, the IDF has claimed the border and a border road that runs parallel to it. Other than a small entry point close to Maghazi, the 2 main pushes are towards the city of Khan Yunis itself. On the southern end, a push has actually captured the roundabout close to the center of Khan Yunis, and on the northern side, an Israeli push has reached and captured long parts of the Salah al-Din road, and then pushed south to meet up with the other IDF advance. This has created another pocket at Jara and then another pocket at Bani Sula. In terms of the overall military situation, there isn't much to say. It's very clear that unless something happens on a diplomatic level, the IDF is going to capture the entire strip. So far, Israel reports a couple hundred casualties, and surely this is, definitely this is a lowball figure, but in terms of their total strength, speed of progress, and footage from the front, Hamas is far from a peer foe to the IDF. Of course, there are losses, and of course, there's video of destroyed equipment, but in my opinion, the frequency of it does not appear to show a huge obstacle for the IDF. In fact, I would go as far as saying that maybe that Israel could finish capturing Gaza without a large U.S. aid package at this point. Of course, the U.S. is donating ammunition and probably sending a lot of weapons under the table that aren't being announced, but a actual monetary package has not been passed. Perhaps bombs and ammunition will be needed by the IDF, and they'll need to be purchased or donated from abroad, but it is not like the Ukraine situation where they're fully dependent on it. The Israeli state has the money to purchase these things. So, there's a bit of speculation on my part, admittedly, but we'll see moving forward. So that being said, we will talk about the bigger problem for the world and the bigger problem for Israel, and that is the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, this area right here. Initially, I thought that, perhaps Iran would be a problem, and by that extension, Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon. But what you have to understand, and what I have started to see, is outside of good PR for these armies, because, all Muslims in the region hate Israel for what they're doing, they do not really care about Gaza or Hamas. Iran gives money to Hamas because they oppose Israel, but Hamas and the Palestinians are Sunni Muslim. Iran and Lebanon are mostly Shia Muslim. When it comes right down to it, they don't really care. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's something like that, but not really friendly enough to risk their own lives or risk the wrath of the United States should they get directly involved. Then I thought maybe Egypt could be a problem. They're the most populous Muslim country, and by and large, very unstable, and maybe the population could force the government into action or even overthrow the government. But Egypt actually has a security pact with Israel, which is certainly strained at the moment, and the U.S. sells them a tremendous amount of weapons. So the Egyptian government doesn't have the motivation to do anything, and the population could not lead a successful overthrow. The military is just too powerful. But an unlikely group has sprang up as the main problem child. The Houthi rebels of Yemen, which are based in this northern part, this northern corner here of Yemen. Another group, actually supported by Iranian weapons and funding, has begun to create massive issues for both Israel and the world. Houthi forces have begun to attack and harass global shipping in the Red Sea. They have been boarding ships and launching missiles at ships heading for Israel or owned by Israeli companies. This has led global shipping firms to halt the use of the route and add weeks onto global trade times. To understand the seriousness of this, I would refer you to the 1956 Suez Crisis. During the early 1950s, Egypt sank a number of ships in the Suez Canal zone, bringing it offline. This was after the Israelis captured the Sinai Peninsula. And then France, Israel, and the United Kingdom invaded Egypt and tried to, depose the government in order to bring the canal back online. This ultimately culminated in a near miss for the world in terms of nuclear war. The Soviet Union was friends with Egypt, and they thought that Israel, France, and the UK were working on the US's behalf. The whole situation ended up calming down. The French and the British were forced by the U.S. to withdraw. France actually withdrew from NATO over the whole ordeal. They were pissed that the U.S. didn't take their side. The U.S. was actually mad because none of the parties informed them of the plan that they were about to implement. Nevertheless, it led to the collapse of the French and British empires abroad, their colonial empires. And then several years later, after oil embargoes by OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, basically all the oil-producing Arab countries, they embargoed the West over their support for Israel. That twisted the arm of the U.S., and the U.S. forced the Israeli government to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula. So you can see a similar situation arising. If global trade takes a hard enough hit from the loss of the Red Sea and the Suez route before the IDF has victory in Gaza, the U.S. could enforce a peace deal between Israel and the Gaza Strip before Israel manages to capture the whole thing. So, currently the Red Sea is basically closed. Major shipping companies have instructed their ships not to travel this route. The U.S. Embassy and the U.S. Navy has warned ships not to travel the route as well. So this is the most likely path that would pit the U.S. against Israeli interests. So this is a big problem for Israel. Not a lot of battlefield problems, but it seems like a lot of geopolitical issues for, the situation that's going on. Some wider issues that are springing up. Hopefully in a couple weeks, I can have an expert on the podcast to speak on these possibilities. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out the links in the description. Consider following along on Telegram and Twitter. That's all from me. Until next time.